Kroschel Publishing presents The Black Dawn Wars Book 1, The Fall of Var, by Kevin Kroschel. Read to you by Kevin Kroschel. Chapter 1, The Last Curve. The fields of Selene were cool this time of year, as fall was growing closer now. From time to time a villager traveled these fields headed to Terrace, others on their way home. Almost everyone who traveled these roads passed here at the last curve, as it was called, but few ever stayed for longer than a few days, except local people. The buildings were average of most small towns, mostly small red brick houses, a few markets selling their wares, and only 2 inns. One was run down and shabby-looking, with worn paint peeling off, and roof shingles littering the property. Spoke volumes of its name, the Fallen Star. The other, 5 stories tall and vibrantly colored, was called the Last Curve Inn. With its tall blue arches and tiny specks of gold, the windows shimmering in the evening light, and 5 doors at the main entrance, many would think it a paradise in these times. The war was still raging, and many were wondering if it would ever end, as if 20 years were not enough. Jenna sighed as she thought about it more. The war had been fought since she was born, though she was never allowed to help in any of the battles. The council had forbidden the order from stepping in, regardless of whose side they would take. She knew if they could step in, they could have ended this already, but the council was adamantly opposed to interfering. Sighing again, she returned her thoughts to the present. She was free for the moment, free to do as she wished for once. 16 years she had spent constantly being trained and taught by the elders, and only now did she have an opportunity to leave Var. Leaving, however, was not entirely with permission. Celorin had insisted she go and take a break for a bit, but Jenna was hesitant to just up and leave without the elders' consent. She did, of course, but only because she needed a break from her studies. Thinking it over, she just barely remembered what it was like to be home. The last time she had been to Came, she was but 4 years old. She wondered for a moment if her family was even still there. She could barely remember her father or her brother's faces, though her mother's was fresh in her mind. She could never forget her gentle smile, even after all these years. She traded many letters back and forth over the years, but it seemed to have been ages since she last received word from them. "I will be there soon," she thought to herself as she turned away from the window, closing the shades before grabbing her bag. Taking out a few clothes, she set them aside on a chair so she would be able to change quickly in the morning. Glancing at the clock on the wall, she realized it was nearly 11:30, well past time to be in bed, if she was to be up early the next day. Undressing quickly and putting on a nightgown, she lay down and closed her eyes. After a nearly 14-hour trip from Faltray, she was exhausted and could use the sleep. She lay there for an hour before finally falling to sleep, thinking about the past and all her training, about the war and the nations involved in it. She also thought about her home and family. Would they even recognize her? Or her them? It did not matter, she realized. They would always be her family, no matter how long they had been apart. Waking the next morning, she slowly rolled out of her bed and rubbed her eyes. Nightmares had plagued her while she slept. The same dreams she had been having for nearly 5 months. Cities consumed by fire, whole nations in ruin. Ash and skeletons the only things remaining, and at the center of it all stood her. A pool of blood at her feet, and a sad expression on her face. It seemed she had had the same dream each night, only slight details differing. One time it would be this city, another it would be that. Mistress Veronal had said it was her fears attempting to manifest themselves, where her waking state forbade such things from her mind. Shaking the fog from her brain, she got off the bed and changed into her clothes. A short black miniskirt, long dark gray leg warmers, and her usual white t-shirt. It was not exactly the normal type of clothing in an area consisting of mostly farms and fishing villages, but she always felt more comfortable in it than trying to fit into her surroundings. Throwing on her dark slippers, she packed up all of her stuff into her bag and took one last look around to make sure she had not forgotten anything and walked out the door. She admired the soothing blue paint on the walls, with the faint glimmer of golden glitter scattered throughout the wall as she walked down the hall to the elevator. Pressing the button, she waited patiently for the elevator to arrive, stepped onto it, and pressed the button for the lobby. She found it funny that there would be a hotel so large in such a small town that it would need an elevator, but with all the traffic from Came, Laris, and Terrace, it was not that hard to believe. She wondered why the only available room was on the 5th floor, but did not have time to contemplate it further when the elevator reached the 4th floor, door opening to let on a fairly handsome, if scruffy-looking, man. She smiled and moved politely off to the side so he could have room to put his bags down. "Good morning," he said enthusiastically, a smile nearly splitting his face in two as he spoke. "Good morning to you as well," she responded elegantly. Politeness and proper manners were something she always strived to maintain. "Not to pry or anything, but where would a pretty young lady such as yourself be off to so early?" Startled at such a bold question, she did not know how to respond. "Why do you ask?" was all she could manage. "Well, I was wondering if I could ask you to dinner sometime, to be honest. But now I'm not so certain I should have asked. Forgive me, I'm an idiot." He bowed his head slightly and turned back to facing the door. A moment later they reached the lobby, and she stepped off the elevator and quickly walked over to the service counter. "Checking out, Miss Sonoris?" Jake asked kindly. She wasn't sure why, but there was something about the middle-aged man that appealed to her. He seemed like a very good person from what she could tell over her dinner the day before. He enjoys dining with his guests in the dining hall, along with his family. His wife, roughly the same age as he, had just given birth to a girl only a few weeks ago. Unlike most babies Jenna had seen, this young girl didn't seem to cry much. Jenna could see Mrs. Taurus just behind the counter, feeding little Anna with the bottle, and humming a soft, soothing song, rocking back and forth gently. "Yes, I'm afraid I must. It was a pleasure staying here, though, Mr. Taurus," Jenna responded cheerfully. "The room was absolutely splendid." "Good to hear," he laughed. "Now, if you'll just sign this here, you'll be all set," he said, handing her a clipboard with a few registration documents on it. She signed her name quickly where he pointed, and handed it back to him. Checking it over once more, he smiled at her. "Thanks. That should just about do it. Have a safe journey, and don't be afraid to stop in again. My wife and I would love to have you again." "I'll be sure to, thank you." She smiled back at him, grabbed her bag, and with a quick farewell, walked out the door into the rather quiet morning street. She remembered how loud it was in Var, and the difference was very noticeable. She almost could not believe any place could be so quiet when she first arrived. Continuing down the road, she threw her bag over her shoulders and headed towards the west end of town. It was only a matter of a few hours before she would arrive at Came, and she could hardly wait. Gazing at her surroundings as she walked, she admired the stone brick roads and the intricate patterns they made throughout the city, the beautiful architecture of the houses, and the small shops. One of the shopkeepers even waved and smiled at her. So she waved and smiled back. Were it not for her needing to return to Var in a few days, she would not have minded living here, she thought. She was so lost in thought that before she realized it, she was well outside the town walls. The grassy fields waving gently in the soft morning breeze, she focused her attention back to the road ahead. It stretched out for miles, curving slightly around the nearby mountains, sparse trees dotting the slopes. She had forgotten how beautiful it was down here, having been but a child when she left. An hour had passed when she noticed a small group of people ahead, sitting by the side of the road. 4 men, crouching or sitting by motorcycles. One of them looked over at her, a grin on his face that did not at all seem friendly. "Well, what have we here?" the one man said as he stood up from beside his bike. With his hair slicked back, he looked every bit the menacing biker. His friends, still crouched by their bikes, looked up and giggled silently. "Where are you off to? Maybe we can give you a lift," one of the others said. "That's quite all right," she responded. "I could use the walk." She tried to continue walking, when the first man stepped in front of her. "You sure?" he said. "You look awfully tired." "I assure you, I'm quite fine," she said bluntly, and stepped to the side around him. He followed again. "I really think you want to come with us." He held a knife in his hand, a glint of irritation in his eye. "If you know what's good for you." "You're not the first person to point a blade at me." She glared coldly into his eyes. "And if you know what's good for you, you'll let me pass. Now." He smirked at her and put the blade to her throat. "I think she likes me, boys," he laughed. "I think she'd like you to leave her alone." She heard the voice spoken behind her. She was so lost in her surroundings, she did not even realize anyone was walking on the road behind her. "And I think I agree with her," the man behind her continued. "And why should I listen to you?" the first man asked. "Because if you don't, you'll find that knife of yours to be useless against that siren behind you," the voice replied. Jenna just barely saw the swift movements of the siren darting in behind the man. He didn't budge. "Akra," he said firmly, and the little siren leaped up and dug her claws into the man's throat, just barely drawing blood. "Best you leave now," Akra said as she growled into the man's ear. He dropped the knife and Akra let go and landed softly on the ground, stepping back. She glared at the other men, who seemed to be reaching for weapons of their own. "Time to go!" the little feline shouted as it grabbed Jenna's arm and pulled her back up the road. Jenna, finally able to see who the man was behind her, almost tripped at the sight of his face. She had met the same man on the elevator back in town. "Get in!" he shouted as he waved her over to the car he was standing in. A shabby little car, nearly 8 years old from what she could tell. It would never be able to outrun those motorcycles. She jumped in anyways, followed closely behind by the Syrian woman, who shouted, "Punch it!" as soon as she reached the car, leaping into the back just as it took off in a burst of speed. A surprising amount of speed, Jenna admitted, as it did not look like it could manage such feats. Holding on to the car, she turned to look behind them, trying in vain to keep her hair from obstructing her vision as the wind rushed over the top of the old convertible. The bikers were frantically getting onto their bikes and were quickly coming up on them. "Name's Titus, and that's Akra," he shouted over the roar of the car's engine and the motorcycles that were quickly catching up. "Looked like you could use a hand." "My name's Jenna, and thanks for the hand. Though I think this rusty bucket won't do us much good." She glanced back behind them. The bike gang was practically on top of them now. "Keep going!" she shouted as she stood up in her seat and faced the bikers, struggling to keep her balance with one hand. In her other hand, a ball of fire formed, and she hurled it with all her might at the road between them and the bikers. Exploding violently, it formed a wall of solid flames, 5 feet high and 50 feet across. The bikers skidded to a halt and shouted curses at them as they struggled to get their bikes around the flames. "Hang on!" she grunted as she flung out another fireball at the road, this one spanning nearly 100 feet across and encircling the bikers and meeting up with the first firewall, creating an inescapable trap. "That should hold him for a while." She sat back down in the seat and looked at her rescuer, who was half stunned at what she had just done. "Close your mouth, boy," Akra said from the back seat. "Women don't like to be gawked at."